They didn't run because they were losing. They ran because they wanted us to follow. The jungle didn't go quiet all at once. It thinned out slowly, like a man pretending not to run. A few minutes earlier, we had been under steady pressure. Not heavy fire, but precise. Short bursts. Well-placed shots that forced us to keep our heads down and our spacing tight. Then suddenly it eased. Not stopped. Eased. That distinction mattered, but not enough, apparently. My radio crackled with reports from the platoon leaders. Contact decreasing. Enemy fire sporadic. No organized resistance detected to the front. I remember standing there, sweat running down my back, helmet heavy on my head, listening to the forest breathe again. Silence in combat is never empty. It's either exhaustion or intention. At that moment, I chose the first explanation. It was the easier one. The signs were there, almost too perfect. Broken branches at waist height, fresh footprints leading deeper into the trees, discarded shell casings that looked deliberately left behind, like breadcrumbs. Our point man knelt, touched the soil, then looked back at me. Fresh, less than an hour old. "They're pulling back, sir." That sentence carried weight, relief, momentum, the unspoken promise that the worst part might already be over. In American doctrine, withdrawal often meant weakness, pressure working, attrition, doing its job, but the enemy we were facing didn't think in straight lines. They didn't retreat because they were beaten. They retreated because they wanted us to move. I knew that, academically, but knowing something and feeling it are two different things under fire. I hesitated, only for a moment, but that moment still visits me at night. Doctrine said pause, reorganize, probe with caution. Reality said don't lose contact. Every instinct drilled into me as an officer screamed that letting the enemy disengage meant losing initiative. In Vietnam, initiative was oxygen. Without it, you suffocated slowly. "Maintain spacing, advance carefully," I ordered. We moved. That was the instant the battlefield changed shape. The enemy was no longer reacting to us. We were reacting to the path they had chosen. And a commander who lets the enemy choose the terrain has already surrendered half the fight. As we advanced, our formation stretched. Not recklessly, but enough. The jungle forced single-file movement in places. Radio chatter became clipped. Visual contact between squads faded in and out like bad reception. And still, no real resistance. That should have frightened me. A fighting withdrawal has rhythm. Pressure, pause, pressure again. What we were seeing had no rhythm. Just space. Just invitation. The enemy wasn't slowing us down. They were letting us speed up. That's when pursuit stops being control and becomes greed. I remember one thought, sharp and unwelcome, cutting through everything else. If I were them, I wouldn't stop here. I pushed it aside. Command is often about choosing which doubts to listen to. That day, I chose wrong. Ahead of us lay a shallow depression in the terrain, thicker brush, limited visibility, natural cover on both flanks. Perfect ground for an ambush. Perfect ground if someone had planned it, and someone had. The first shot didn't come from the front. That was the mistake that cost us. It came from the left flank, low, sharp, deliberate. One round, one man down, no warning burst, no chaos, just a single rifle cracking the air and then vanishing back into the jungle. My radio exploded instantly. "Contact left! Man down! Can't see them!" That's when it hit me. This wasn't pursuit anymore. This was containment. They had let us move forward just far enough to expose our sides, just far enough to stretch our formation and narrow our fields of fire. We were no longer advancing into empty space. We were standing inside someone else's geometry. We returned fire immediately. At least we tried to. The problem was simple and terrifying. There was nothing to shoot at, no silhouettes, no movement, no muzzle flashes we could track, just sound, directionless, echoing through leaves and trunks and uneven ground. Our rounds tore into trees, vines, and shadows. The jungle absorbed everything. That's when fear changes shape. You stop fearing death and start fearing invisibility. The enemy wasn't overwhelming us with volume. They were controlling us with precision. Every time one of my men adjusted position, another shot snapped past him. Every time we tried to bring up heavier fire, the shooting shifted somewhere else. They weren't trying to wipe us out. They were pinning us in place. I finally understood the retreat. It hadn't been a withdrawal. It had been a lure. They pulled back just enough to make us believe they were disengaging, just enough to invite pursuit. Once we crossed an invisible line, once our formation loosened and our attention narrowed, they stopped running. They stepped aside. Now we were the ones being fixed in place, while unseen units maneuvered around us. This wasn't a spontaneous ambush, it was rehearsed. Um, that realization hits different when you're standing inside it. And then the rear element called in, contact from behind. That's when the trap completed its shape. Front, silent pressure. Flanks, active fire. Rear, sudden engagement. We weren't surrounded in a circle. We were caught in a funnel, one that narrowed every second. They weren't attacking everywhere. They were attacking where movement mattered. Cutting options, killing momentum. The men felt it instantly. You could hear it in their voices. Not panic yet, but something colder. The understanding that escape routes had opinions now. This is where command stops being theory. I had seconds to choose, hold position and risk being collapsed on, push forward into unknown ground, or attempt a fighting withdrawal through a rear contact we hadn't mapped. There was no clean option. That's the genius of a feigned retreat ambush. By the time you recognize it, every decision carries blood. I ordered the platoons to tighten, sectors overlapping, suppressive fire short, and disciplined. No chasing sounds, no firing at ghosts. We weren't going to win this by aggression. We were going to survive it by control. Once we stabilized, the enemy changed rhythm. Fire no longer came from fixed points. It walked. A burst from the right flank. Silence. Then 2 shots from deeper left. Then a single crack behind us, just enough to force heads down. They weren't trying to overwhelm our positions. They were hurting us. Every shot had intent. Every pause was a question. Will you move? And when we did, when a team shifted or tried to reposition, the jungle answered immediately. That's when you understand you're not fighting soldiers, you're fighting timing. We tightened our perimeter, sectors overlapped, fields of fire shortened. No one fired unless they had a confirmed direction. That discipline saved lives because the enemy was waiting for panic. A feigned retreat ambush thrives on impulse. If we had rushed to where it stretched down, we would have stretched again, and they would have folded us in half. Instead, we slowed the fight, and when we slowed it, something interesting happened. The enemy slowed too. They didn't escalate, they probed. That told me everything. This wasn't about annihilation, this was about exhaustion. Fear in this kind of fight doesn't come from casualties. It comes from anticipation, from waiting for the next shot and not knowing where it will come from. Minutes stretched. Men whispered instead of spoke. Eyes stayed locked on empty greenery. Every rustle felt deliberate. The enemy used that. Occasionally, a single round would snap overhead, not aimed to kill, but to remind us they were still there, still watching, still deciding. That's when the jungle stops feeling neutral. It starts feeling hostile. Then they gave us hope. Fire from the rear stopped, not gradually, cleanly. Reports came in, no movement behind us, no sound, no pressure. It looked like an opening. That's the cruelest part of a well-executed, feigned retreat. They offer you an exit, but the exit is timed. If we rushed it, they'd strike again from the flanks as we moved. If we waited too long, they'd reset the trap somewhere else. They weren't chasing us, they were managing us. I made the call. We would withdraw, but slowly, deliberately, covered movement, no sprinting, no bunching. Fire teams leapfrogged back one element at a time, weapons never leaving the tree line. And sure enough, when the last team moved, the jungle spoke again. A sharp burst from the right, not enough to stop us, just enough to remind us that they were allowing this. That's when I understood the final lesson. They weren't trying to trap us forever. They were teaching us that from the moment we took the bait, this fight belonged to them. As we pulled back, something changed. The fire didn't follow. Not the way it should have if they wanted a decisive engagement. No pursuit bursts, no pressure from behind, just occasional measured shots, enough to keep us honest, not enough to stop us. That told me the truth. They had achieved what they came for. A feigned retreat ambush isn't about holding ground, it's about shaping behavior. And by this point, our behavior had been completely rewritten. We moved slower, quieter, wiser. That was their victory. Cinematic nighttime jungle camp scene, American commander sitting alone, helmet off, contemplative expression, dim firelight, heavy shadows, reflective war drama tone, ultra-realistic. Once we reached defensible ground, we halted. Medics moved quietly. Casualties were counted. Ammunition checked. We had lost men. Not many, but enough. Enough to make the lesson permanent. Every casualty came from movement, from curiosity, from believing the fight was going somewhere we controlled. None came from holding ground. That's when doctrine meets reality. I looked at the map later. On paper, it was a simple engagement, brief contact, enemy withdrawal, light casualties. The map didn't show hesitation. It didn't show fear. It didn't show the moment a commander realizes the enemy understands him better than he understands them. Terrain wasn't their greatest weapon. Patience was. That night, I replayed the beginning, the silence, the tracks, the decision. Feigned retreat works because it doesn't challenge pride, it invites it. And every army, no matter how trained, has pride. They knew that. They used it. The jungle didn't chase us. That was the last insult. When we finally reached secure ground, there was no sense of escape, only permission, as if the enemy had decided the lesson was complete. That night, the men didn't talk much, no jokes, no bravado, just quiet movements, slow checks of gear, long stares into nothing, because something had shifted. They had entered the fight believing combat was about contact and firepower. They left it understanding combat was about choice and who gets to make it. The feigned retreat is simple in theory. You give ground, you show weakness, you invite pursuit, but its power doesn't come from movement. It comes from psychology. It convinces the enemy they're winning just enough to make them abandon patience, just enough to make them hurry. Once that happens, discipline fractures, formations stretch, command decisions compress, and that's when the ambush begins. Not with gunfire, with consent. American doctrine valued momentum. If the enemy pulled back, you pressed. If contact broke, you reestablished it. The enemy we faced valued something else. Time. They didn't need to defeat us outright. They needed us to move when they wanted, stop when they decided, and leave believing we had survived something worse than death. They didn't measure success in terrain gained. They measured it in hesitation earned. And from that day forward, hesitation followed us everywhere. Back home, the engagement would be logged as minor. A brief contact, enemy disengaged, mission continued. But maps don't remember sounds. They don't remember the way men flinch at silence after learning what silence can hide. They don't record the moment a commander realizes the enemy has read his playbook and chosen when to close it. That knowledge doesn't fade. It settles. The enemy never intended to destroy us that day. They intended to educate us. And education lasts longer than fear. From that point on, every time a firefight suddenly eased, every time tracks led too neatly away, every time the jungle opened just a little too easily, we stopped. We listened. We remembered. Because the most dangerous ambush isn't the one that kills you. It's the one that teaches you the war will never fight on your terms again.